The old Honda Civic rattled slightly as it turned into Whitecliff's main entrance, a sound distinctly out of place among the purring engines of luxury cars that usually pass through these gates. Behind the wheel, Mei Lin took a deep breath. Her hands, bearing the slight calluses of someone who worked with technology rather than someone who paid others to work for her, gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. Whitecliff wasn't just any neighborhood. It was the neighborhood in the coastal city, where houses weren't called houses but estates, where children didn't go to school but to academies, and where the neighborhood association meetings were rumored to be as exclusive as private club gatherings. You should attend at least one meeting, her realtor had insisted when Mei moved into the small cottage at the edge of the community 3 weeks ago. It's a good way to meet your neighbors. Mei wasn't sure she wanted to meet her neighbors. At 42, she had spent most of her life avoiding exactly the kind of people who lived in places like Whitecliff, but the cottage had excellent internet connectivity and a perfect view of the ocean, 2 things essential for both her work and peace of mind. So here she was, parking her 10-year-old car between a gleaming Bentley and a brand new Range Rover. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror out of habit, not vanity. Mei saw what everyone else would see. A woman with silver streaking through her black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup, wearing a plain navy blue sweater she'd bought on sale years ago. She didn't look poor, just ordinary, which in Whitecliff might as well be the same thing. Just one meeting, she told herself, just to be polite. The community clubhouse loomed ahead, all stone and glass and carefully arranged lighting that made it glow like something from a luxury real estate magazine. Mei walked through the open double doors into a space that smelled of expensive perfume and polished wood. Conversations stopped. Not all at once, but in a rippling wave as heads turned and eyes assessed her. Mei had experienced this before, the quick calculations people made. Her clothes, department store, her watch, practical digital, her bag, well-worn leather, and the conclusions they jumped to. A woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and a diamond necklace that caught the light with every breath she took broke away from a group and approached. Her smile was as practiced as a news anchor's. "Hello there," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure others could hear. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Eleanor Harrington, president of the Whitecliff Association." She didn't extend her hand. "Mei Lin," Mei replied simply. "I moved into the cottage on Ocean View Lane. Thank you for having me." Eleanor's eyes widened just slightly. "The Miller cottage? I didn't realize it had sold." The unspoken question hung in the air. How could someone like you afford to buy in Whitecliff? "I needed a quiet place to work," Mei explained, though she didn't owe an explanation. The realtor mentioned these meetings happen monthly. Indeed, the first Thursday. Very traditional. Eleanor's gaze slid over Mei's shoulder. "Richard, you simply must tell Gregory about your new yacht. He's been considering an upgrade." And, just like that, Mei was dismissed. She found a seat toward the back of the room as people began settling in for the meeting. A waiter, because of course there was catering at a neighborhood association meeting, offered her a choice of sparkling or still water. No wine for the unfamiliar woman, unlike what was being poured freely for the regulars. The meeting began with discussions about landscaping costs, complaints about service staff being visible during daylight hours. Can't they come at 5 a.m. before we're having breakfast on the terrace? And debates about the appropriate minimum donation for the upcoming charity gala. "We're thinking $10,000 per plate this year," announced a man with the confidence of someone who has never had his credit card declined. Last year's $8,000 felt a bit accessible. Scattered laughter followed. Mei took notes in her worn notebook, something that drew curious glances from those sitting nearby. In a room full of tablets and phones, her paper and pencil stood out like her Honda in the parking lot. When Eleanor called for new business, Mei raised her hand. The room went quiet again, like a classroom, when the student who never speaks suddenly volunteers an answer. "Yes, Ms. Lin." Eleanor's pronunciation made it sound like a question. Mei stood up, a habit from years of presenting at conferences where she was often the only woman in the room. I noticed the community has a lot of unused green space behind the clubhouse. Have you considered putting in community garden plots? It could be a nice way to grow fresh produce and bring neighbors together. The silence that followed felt heavy until someone toward the front snickered. Eleanor's smile remained fixed. How quaint. But Whitecliff residents typically don't grow their own vegetables. We have specialty grocers for that sort of thing. Or staff, someone added, triggering another wave of laughter. May nodded, undeterred. I also wanted to ask about educational initiatives. Does the community sponsor any scholarship programs for local students? I work in technology, and I've seen how valuable early opportunities can be. A man in an expensive suit that somehow still looked uncomfortable on his frame cleared his throat. I'm Harold Whitmore, head of the Whitecliff Investment Group. And what kind of technology work do you do exactly? The way he said technology made it sound like she'd claimed to be an alchemist or a fortune teller. Problem solving, mostly, May answered simply. Harold let out a laugh that was more like a bark. Well, my 10-year-old son could probably give you some pointers. He's quite the computer whiz, already building his own gaming PC. Expensive hobby, but that's what trust funds are for, right? He looked around for approval and received it in nods and smiles. How wonderful, May said quietly. Young minds often have the most innovative ideas. The meeting moved on. The upcoming charity gala dominated the conversation, with detailed discussions of table arrangements which media outlets would be invited, and the delicate politics of who would sit where. Ms. Lynn, Eleanor said suddenly, will you be attending the gala? It's quite the event of the season. Her tone made it clear she expected, perhaps hoped for, a negative response. All eyes turned to May again. The unspoken challenge hung in the air. I'll have to check my schedule, May replied. What charity benefits from the event? Eleanor blinked as if the question was unexpected. Well, the Whitecliff Foundation, of course. We fund various initiatives. I see. And what percentage of the donations goes directly to those initiatives? The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Our treasurer handles those details, Eleanor said dismissively. Now about the table centerpieces. As the meeting wound down, May noticed the small groups reforming, deliberately excluding her. She gathered her notebook and pen, nodded politely to those whose eyes she managed to catch, and headed for the door. I give her 6 months, she overheard Eleanor saying to her circle as she passed. People like that never last in Whitecliff. They always realize they don't belong and scurry back to wherever they came from. Soft laughter followed May out the door. The night air felt clean after the perfumed interior. She walked slowly to her car, now sitting alone between empty parking spaces where the luxury vehicles had been. May didn't feel angry or hurt. This wasn't the first time she'd been judged and dismissed based on appearances, and it probably wouldn't be the last. What people like Eleanor and Harold never understood was that their quick judgments revealed far more about them than about the people they judged. Back in her car, May pulled out her phone. Not the latest model, but one with security, features most people didn't know existed. She scrolled to a contact simply labeled Jin and pressed call. It's me, she said when the line connected. I've made my decision about the foundation project. She paused, looking back at the glowing clubhouse. Yes, all of it. Let's start with the old community center building. Have the team draw up the papers. I'll sign in the morning. She ended the call and started her car, the engine sputtering once before catching. As she drove away from Whitecliff's clubhouse, May smiled slightly to herself. 6 months, Eleanor had said. It wouldn't take nearly that long to show this community exactly what kind of technology problem solver Maylene really was. And unlike the performance she'd just witnessed inside that clubhouse, her show wouldn't be for her own benefit. It would be for people who truly needed it. The Honda Civic turned out of the exclusive neighborhood, its taillights disappearing into the night, leaving no trace of the woman who would soon turn Whitecliff's carefully arranged social hierarchy completely upside down. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when May Lynn began her morning walk along Whitecliff's private beach. Her footprints were the first to mark the sand that day. She carried a small bag, stopping occasionally to pick up bits of plastic. forgotten toys, or other trash that had washed ashore overnight. It had become her routine in the 3 weeks since the neighborhood association meeting. A jogger approached, from the opposite direction, slowing as he recognized her. It was Thomas Reed, who owned the sprawling Mediterranean-style house on the bluff. He'd been one of the few who had nodded politely at the meeting. "Morning," he called out slightly, out of breath. "You're the new resident, right? The cottage on Ocean View?" May nodded. "May-Lin," she said, extending her hand after wiping it on her pants. He shook it firmly. "Tom, you're up early." "Best time of day," she replied, gesturing to the orange and pink sky. "Quietest, too." Tom glanced at her bag of collected trash. "The association pays a service to clean the beach, you know." "I don't mind," May said with a small shrug. "It's my walk anyway. Might as well be useful." He seemed to study her for a moment. "I heard you work in tech?" "Something like that," May answered with the same vague response she'd given at the meeting. "My company developed a trading app," Tom offered. "What's your field?" "Problem solving," she said again, then added, "mostly quantum computing applications." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Quantum? That's cutting edge. Which company?" May smiled. "I should get back to my walk." "Nice meeting you properly, Tom." She continued on, leaving him standing there with a puzzled expression. By noon, Tom had told his wife, who told her tennis partner, who mentioned it to Eleanor Harrington during their standing lunch date at the White Cliff Country Club. "Quantum computing?" Eleanor repeated, setting down her mimosa. "That's hardly believable. She probably answers phones at some tech support center and is trying to sound important." Still, her friend Diane mused, it would explain how she afforded the cottage. "Those tech people can make good money." Eleanor scoffed. The Miller cottage was a distress sale, hardly prime real estate. "Now let's discuss the seating chart for the gala. We need to make sure the Petersons and the Wilsons aren't at the same table after that unfortunate incident at the regatta." But curiosity about the mysterious new resident continued to ripple through Whitecliff. Later that week, May was seen, meeting with a group of serious-looking men and women in business attire at the abandoned community center, a concrete eyesore that the association had been trying to demolish for years, blocked only by some obscure historical preservation clause. Harold Whitmore happened to drive by during the meeting and immediately called Eleanor. "There are architects there," he reported. "I recognized Javier Rodriguez's firm. They designed that amazing tech campus in Silicon Valley last year." What would she want with that old building? Eleanor wondered aloud. And how would she know Javier? He doesn't take small projects. The next day, Eleanor orchestrated a casual run-in with May at the local coffee shop, the only business in Whitecliff that wasn't members only. "May, what a pleasant surprise," Eleanor exclaimed with practiced warmth when she spotted the other woman waiting for her order. May looked up from her phone. "Hello, Eleanor. I was just telling my husband about your suggestion for community gardens. So, rustic." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We don't see you much around the neighborhood." "I work long hours," May replied simply. "Yes, of course. In technology, wasn't it?" Eleanor tilted her head. "I noticed some activity at the old community center. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" May's order was called out. "Just exploring options," she said, picking up her coffee. "Have a nice day, Eleanor." Eleanor watched her leave, noticing for the first time that despite May's unassuming appearance, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who was used to being listened to. The whispers intensified when May was spotted having lunch with Mayor Chen at Lola's Diner, a cheap breakfast spot in the neighboring middle-class area, instead of at one of the upscale restaurants where important business was usually conducted in Whitecliff. "She's probably his cousin or something," Harold's wife theorized at their weekly bridge game. "They're both Asian American," Eleanor cut in sharply. "Really, Veronica, that's beneath you." "I was going to say involved in local politics," Veronica replied defensively. "May was at the city council meeting last night. My housekeeper's son works security there and mentioned it." Eleanor's interest was piqued despite herself. What business would she have at a city council meeting? No one knew, which bothered the White Cliff elite more than they cared to admit. The whispers turned into open speculation when invitations to the annual White Cliff Charity Gala were sent out, and May's name appeared on the list. The gala was the social event of the year, with tables carefully arranged according to wealth and influence. Eleanor, as the committee chair, personally oversaw each invitation. "I had to invite her," Eleanor explained to her inner circle over lunch. "It would look bad not to include a resident, even if she's not our typical sort. Besides, the minimum donation will probably scare her off." But 2 days later, May's VP arrived accepting the invitation, with a note that she would be bringing a +1, an elderly woman named Dr. Lee, who had been her math teacher in high school. A high school teacher as her guest? Veronica nearly choked on her salad. To a $10,000 a plate event? "Perhaps we underestimated her financial situation," Thomas Reed suggested carefully. His comment earned him sharp looks from the others. The night of the gala arrived. The White Cliff Grand Ballroom had been transformed into an elegant space with crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, and centerpieces of rare orchids. Women dripped in jewels, men wore custom tuxedos, and conversations about yacht purchases and investment properties filled the air. May arrived in a simple black dress that, while elegant, was clearly off the rack from a department store. Her companion, Dr. Lee, was a tiny woman in her 70s who wore a vintage kipau and comfortable shoes. Eleanor, gleaming in a designer gown and Harry Winston diamonds, made a show of consulting her seating chart. "Oh, May," and guessed. "You're at table 19, she said with a thin smile. Table 19 was in the back corner, far from the stage and populated by Eleanor's least favorite neighbors and those who had barely made the minimum donation. "Thank you," May said, unfazed. She led Dr. Lee to their table, introducing herself to the other guests with the same quiet politeness she'd shown since arriving in White Cliff. The first crack in the community's dismissive attitude came when Mayor Chen made his way directly to table 19, bypassing several more prominent groups. "May, Dr. Lee," he exclaimed warmly. "I'm so glad you could make it." "We wouldn't miss it," May replied. "Have you given any more thought to our discussion?" The mayor nodded eagerly. "The council is very interested. If you can secure the funding you mentioned, we can fast-track the permits." Their conversation continued for several minutes, animated and clearly substantive. The mayor left looking extraordinarily pleased, patting May's shoulder with familiar respect. "What was that about?" whispered one of the table 19 guests, a retired professor who had never quite fit into White Cliff's social scene. "Just a little project I'm working on," May answered with a small smile. The annual auction began after dinner. Harold and Eleanor Harrington had their sights set on a rare painting by a local artist whose work had recently been featured in major galleries. The bidding was spirited, quickly reaching $500,000. $600,000, Harold called confidently, certain that would end the competition. A small paddle raised in the back. $700,000, May's voice carried clearly. A murmur went through the crowd. Harold's face flushed as he raised his paddle again. $800,000. $900,000, May countered immediately. The room grew hushed as the bidding continued. When it reached $1.1 million, Harold hesitated, looking to Eleanor, who gave a slight nod. $1.1 million, Harold announced, a note of finality in his voice. $1.2 million, May said calmly. The auctioneer looked around the room. $1.2 million going once, twice, sold to Ms. Lin for $1.2 million. A perplexed hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the woman in the department store dress at the back table. May simply nodded, handed her credit card to a stunned auction assistant, and resumed her conversation with Dr. Lee as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Do you remember that calculus problem you gave us junior year?" she was saying. "The one about optimization? I think I finally found a real-world application for it." As the gala continued around them, the residents of White Cliff found their attention repeatedly drawn to table 19. The woman they had dismissed was suddenly the evening's biggest donor. More puzzling still was her apparent indifference to their attention. Who is she really? Eleanor whispered to Harold as they watched May chatting with Dr. Lee. Nobody spends that kind of money without wanting something in return. Harold frowned. I'll make some calls tomorrow. Everyone leaves a digital trail these days. What neither of them knew was that May had spent the $1 million painting's worth many times over that same week, with not a single penny directed toward raising her social status in Whitecliff. And the digital trail Harold was so confident about finding had been carefully curated for years, showing exactly what May wanted the world to see, and nothing more. As May helped Dr. Lee into her modest Honda at the end of the evening, she noticed Eleanor watching from the entrance, diamonds glittering under the portico lights. "Thank you for coming with me tonight," May told her former teacher. "I know these events aren't your favorite." Dr. Lee patted her hand affectionately. "I wouldn't miss seeing you shake up a place like this, just like you used to question everything in class." She peered at May with wise eyes. "Are you sure about this plan of yours?" May glanced back at the glittering ballroom, at the curious and confused faces now watching her with new interest. "More sure than ever," she replied. "Some lessons can only be taught through experience." She drove away from the gala, leaving behind a community suddenly very interested in discovering who Maylene really was and why she had chosen their exclusive neighborhood as her home. 3 months had passed since Maylene's arrival in Whitecliff, and the neighborhood had settled into a new normal. The residents still whispered about the mysterious woman in the cottage, but they did so with growing curiosity rather than dismissive mockery. The $1 million auction bid had seen to that. Morning fog still clung to the streets when a convoy of sleek black vehicles pulled up to the old community center. Men and women in business attire stepped out, carrying tablets and portfolios. They were followed by people in more casual clothing who were immediately recognizable to anyone who followed technology news. Renowned architects, sustainability experts, and tech innovators whose faces occasionally appeared on the covers of business magazines. Across the street, Diane Fletcher was walking her purebred Pomeranian when the cars arrived. She immediately called Eleanor. "You won't believe what's happening at the community center," she hissed into her phone. "At least a dozen people in suits, and I swear I just saw Akiko Tanaka get out of one of the cars." "The Akiko Tanaka? The sustainable architecture guru?" Eleanor's voice rose with disbelief. "Yes, and there's that famous tech investor, the one with the beard who's always talking about quantum something or other on those business shows your husband watches." "Who else is there?" Eleanor demanded. Diane strained to see. "They're going inside now. Wait, is that—" "It is. It's Maylene, and she's greeting them like she's in charge." Eleanor hung up without saying goodbye and immediately called her husband. "Harold, check your news alerts. Something's happening with that Lynn woman." Harold was already ahead of her. "I'm looking at it right now. The Coastal Times just published a feature on her. You're not going to believe this." Within the hour, every resident of Whitecliff was reading the same article. The enigmatic Maylene, the quiet revolutionary behind quantum core technologies. The article revealed what May had kept hidden behind her vague, problem-solving in technology description. She wasn't merely working in quantum computing. She had pioneered breakthrough quantum algorithms that had transformed everything from drug discovery to climate modeling. Her patents had generated billions in revenue, and she held a controlling stake in Quantum Core, one of the most innovative tech companies in the world. More surprising to the Whitecliff elite was learning that despite her enormous wealth, estimated at $11 billion, May lived modestly and directed most of her fortune toward education initiatives and sustainable community development. The article mentioned her foundation's focus on bringing cutting-edge technology education to underserved communities. The neighborhood WhatsApp group, usually filled with complaints about gardeners or announcements about social events, exploded with links to articles about May's accomplishments. "Did you see this?" wrote Thomas Reed. "She invented the quantum encryption protocol that half the world's financial institutions use." "There's hardly any information about her personal life online," added Veronica. "No red carpet photos, no society events, just pictures of her receiving science awards or working with students." Her Quantum Core stock went up 15% today after they announced a new climate initiative, Harold contributed. She just made about $600 million on paper since breakfast. Eleanor was frantically searching online, discovering that May's true net worth placed her among the 50 wealthiest people in America. Yet there was almost no trace of her in the society pages or the usual haunts of the ultra-wealthy. "We need to do damage control," Eleanor announced to her inner circle, who had gathered for an emergency lunch at the country club. "We've been less than welcoming to one of the most successful women in technology." "That's putting it mildly," Thomas said dryly. "You called her cottage quaint to her face and suggested her gardening ideas were for people who couldn't afford grocery delivery." Eleanor's cheeks flushed. "Well, how were we supposed to know? She drives that old Honda and dresses like she shops at outlet malls." "I'm more concerned about what she's doing with the community center," Harold interjected. "Those weren't just random architects she was meeting with. Those were the people who designed the Green Tech campus in Singapore and that amazing solar-powered research facility in Kenya." "She could have told us who she was," Veronica complained. "Would it have made a difference in how you treated her?" Thomas asked pointedly. The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. That evening, Eleanor called an emergency neighborhood association meeting. The same room that had been half empty for May's first appearance was now packed with every White Cliff resident, all eager to learn more about their mysterious neighbor. May's seat remained conspicuously empty. "As you've all no doubt heard," Eleanor began, her voice professionally pleasant, "we've recently learned more about our new neighbor, May Lin. I think it would be wonderful to organize a proper welcome reception to show our appreciation for her choosing White Cliff as her home." Nods and murmurs of agreement filled the room. "I've taken the liberty of drafting an invitation," Eleanor continued. "Perhaps we could host it at the clubhouse next week. I'm thinking an elegant evening affair. Nothing too ostentatious, of course." The meeting ended with unanimous approval for the welcome reception and a committee formed to organize it. Eleanor personally volunteered to deliver the invitation to May's cottage the next morning. She arrived at the modest house at precisely 10 a.m., dressed in what she considered her most approachable outfit, a casual Chanel ensemble that had only cost a few $1,000s. She had rehearsed what to say, how to be warm without seeming desperate, friendly without being overfamiliar. But May wasn't home. A construction worker from the community center site happened to be walking by and informed Eleanor that Ms. Lin is in meetings all day with the mayor's office about permits. Eleanor left the ornate invitation in May's mailbox and sent her a text message, having obtained her number from the neighborhood directory. White Cliff would be honored to properly welcome you at a reception next Thursday. The whole community is eager to get to know you better. May's reply came 3 hours later. "Thank you for the invitation. I'm quite busy with the community center renovation. Perhaps another time." The rejection sent shockwaves through White Cliff's social hierarchy. Nobody declined an invitation from Eleanor Harrington. More shocking still was that May hadn't even offered an alternative date or expressed regret at not being able to attend. "What do we do now?" Veronica asked when the news spread. "She clearly doesn't want our welcome." "Maybe she doesn't need it," Thomas suggested. "Did any of you consider that? She's been here 3 months and not one of us made her feel welcome until we found out she was a billionaire." Harold wasn't willing to give up so easily. The next day, he arrived at May's cottage with an expensive bottle of wine, a rare vintage, from his personal collection, and rang the doorbell. May answered wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in its usual practical ponytail. If she was surprised to see Harold Whitmore on her doorstep, she didn't show it. "Good afternoon, Harold," she said politely. "May, I hope I'm not disturbing you." He held out the wine bottle. "I wanted to bring you a little housewarming gift. Belated, of course." She accepted the bottle with a polite thank you. "I also wanted to personally invite you to join our White Cliff investment circle," he continued. "We meet monthly to discuss opportunities, and someone with your business acumen would be an incredible addition." May studied him for a moment. "That's very kind of you to offer." "We have some substantial portfolios in the group," Harold pressed on. "My fund alone manages over $2 billion in assets." A small smile touched May's lips. "I'll consider it." "Wonderful. I can send you the details of our next meeting." "Please do," she replied. Thank you for stopping by, Harold. As he turned to leave, feeling quite pleased with himself, May added, By the way, the wine is lovely. I'm sure it will fetch a good price at the public school's charity auction next week. Harold froze mid-step, turning back slowly. I'm sorry? The wine, May repeated. I don't drink alcohol, but I'm sure it will help raise money for the school's new science lab. They're doing remarkable work with very limited resources. Before Harold could respond, his phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced down and saw the headline, Quantum Core Technologies acquires struggling coastal manufacturing plant, plans green technology conversion. He looked up at May with new understanding. The factory in East Side? You bought it? The workers, they need stable jobs, May said simply, and we need components for our new climate monitoring systems. It seemed like a practical solution. That's $100 million investment at least, Harold said, unable to hide his shock. The East Side factory had been a source of constant worry for the city, as rumors of its closure threatened hundreds of local jobs. 120 million, actually, May corrected him gently, plus another 80 for modernization and worker training. But it's an investment in people, not just property. She bid him a good day and closed the door, leaving Harold staring at her modest cottage with the realization that the woman inside could have bought every house in Whitecliff and barely noticed the expense. That evening, as Harold shared what had happened with Eleanor and their friends, the truth began to sink in. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, and excluded wasn't just wealthy. She was powerful in a way they had never encountered before, and she seemed entirely uninterested in their approval, their social circles, or their friendship now that they were offering it. She's going to donate that wine I gave her, Harold said, still sounding stunned. A $6,000 bottle of Bordeaux, and she's just giving it away. To a public school auction, Veronica added, equally shocked. Thomas Reed laughed, for the first time since the revelations had begun. I think we're all missing the point here. We've spent our lives believing that money buys acceptance, that wealth is something to display. Mei Lin just completely upended that idea. She has more money than all of us combined, and she doesn't care if we know it or not. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by a notification on all their phones simultaneously. An email from the Neighborhood Association account, which Eleanor managed. The subject line read, Community Center Project, Public Meeting. The email sent from Mei Lin invited all Whitecliff residents to an informational session about the community center renovation. It was scheduled for the following week at the East Side Public Library, not in Whitecliff at all, but in the working-class neighborhood that bordered it. The final line read, This project will impact all our neighboring communities. All voices and perspectives are valued in this discussion, casual attire suggested. The Whitecliff elite exchanged uncertain glances. They were being invited not as special guests, but as equal participants alongside residents from neighborhoods they rarely visited. And for the first time in Whitecliff's history, they were the ones who needed to decide whether to accept an invitation, rather than being the ones whose invitations others desperately wanted. 6 months after Mei Lin's arrival, Whitecliff had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The biggest change stood at the heart of the community, the once abandoned community center, now transformed into something that barely resembled its former self. Gone was the crumbling concrete eyesore. In its place stood a gleaming structure of glass, reclaimed wood, and living walls covered with native plants. Solar panels formed a striking geometric pattern on the roof, and a small wind farm spun lazily behind the building, catching the coastal breeze. The sign at the entrance read, Whitecliff Community Innovation Hub, in simple, elegant lettering. Today was the grand opening, and the crowd gathered outside was unlike any Whitecliff had ever seen. Residents from the exclusive neighborhood stood, shoulder to shoulder with families from the surrounding middle-class areas. Children darted excitedly between adults, eager to explore the promised technology labs inside. News vans lined the street, their reporters doing live stand-ups with the impressive building as their backdrop. Eleanor Harrington, wearing a designer outfit she'd carefully selected to appear approachable yet refined, positioned herself near the entrance hoping to be caught on camera when May arrived. Harold and several other prominent White Cliff residents had similarly placed themselves strategically throughout the crowd. A murmur rippled through the gathering as May's Honda pulled into the parking lot. She stepped out wearing the same kind of outfit she always wore: simple jeans, a button-up shirt, and practical shoes. The only concession to the occasion was a small pin on her collar with the Quantum Core logo. Rather than heading straight to the podium set up for speeches, May began greeting people in the crowd, starting with the East Side factory workers and their families. She knew many by name. "Lee Wei," she called out to an older man with calloused hands. "How are the new training programs going?" "Life-changing," he replied with a wide smile. "My daughter is learning alongside me. She's better with the computer models than I am." A young woman beside him beamed. "The scholarship program means I can finish my engineering degree while working at the plant part-time. I never thought that would be possible." May nodded, clearly pleased. "That's exactly what we hoped for. You'll have to show me your latest designs when you have time." Eleanor, watching this exchange from a distance, fought to keep her professional smile in place. After weeks of trying to arrange a private lunch with May to discuss philanthropic synergies, she was still waiting for a response. Yet here was May, chatting easily with factory workers as if they were old friends. Finally, May made her way to the podium, accompanied by the mayor and several key figures from her team. The mayor spoke first, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Today marks a new chapter for our entire region," he announced. "What you see behind me isn't just a building. It's a bridge between communities that have been separated by more than just geography for too long." He detailed how the Chen Foundation had funded the entire project with an endowment ensuring its operation for decades to come. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. When May stepped up to speak, her quiet voice somehow commanded more attention than the mayor's practiced delivery. "6 months ago, I moved to White Cliff looking for a quiet place to work," she began. "What I found was a community divided by invisible walls. On one side, extraordinary privilege. On the other, extraordinary potential. This innovation hub aims to connect these two worlds." She outlined what the center would offer: cutting-edge technology education for all ages, research facilities for environmental science, community spaces for collaboration, and job training programs linked directly to employment opportunities at the modernized factory. The factory, by the way, will begin production next month on components for our new climate monitoring systems, May added. It will employ 300 people from the local community with living wages and benefits. This isn't charity, it's an investment in human potential. After the speeches, the doors opened and people flooded in to explore the new space. Children ran toward the interactive science exhibits while adults wandered through the various sections, marveling at the technology available for public use. Eleanor finally saw her chance when May stepped away from the main crowd to examine a wall of community artwork. "May, what an extraordinary achievement," Eleanor gushed, approaching with practiced warmth. "You've truly transformed our little community." May turned with a polite smile. "Thank you, Eleanor. Though I'd say the community is transforming itself, I'm just providing some resources." "We'd love to support your vision," Eleanor pressed on. "The White Cliff Women's Philanthropic Circle would be honored if you'd co-chair our annual benefit. Your perspective would be so valuable, and it would give us a chance to properly welcome you into our community leadership." May studied Eleanor, for a moment her expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. "I appreciate the invitation, Eleanor, but I believe my resources are better directed toward initiatives with measurable community impact rather than events primarily serving social objectives." The gentle rejection was delivered without malice, yet Eleanor felt her cheeks burn as if she'd been slapped. Before she could respond, a group of teenagers approached May with questions about the coding programs, and she turned away to give them her full attention. Eleanor drifted back to where Harold was sampling the catered refreshments, locally sourced, and prepared by a culinary training program for at-risk youth, according to the small signs beside each dish. "Any luck?" he asked, noting her expression. "She turned me down," Eleanor said quietly. politely, but firmly. Harold sighed. She turned, down my investment group too. Said her team handles all her financial decisions based on ethical impact guidelines. He took a bite of a remarkably good pastry. Do you know what the strangest part is? I'm not even angry. 3 months ago I would have been offended, but now... Now what? Eleanor prompted when he trailed off. He gestured around the bustling innovation hub. Now I'm just impressed. She's accomplished more meaningful things in 6 months than our neighborhood association has in 20 years of charity galas. As the day continued, the Whitecliff elite watched as their neighborhood underwent a subtle but profound shift in status dynamics. Mothers who had once pulled their children away when passing May's cottage now encouraged them to introduce themselves and ask about science careers. Men who had mocked her problem-solving description now mentioned their connection to the quantum computing pioneer in business meetings. Even May's vegetable garden, once considered an eyesore-breaking neighborhood, aesthetic guidelines was now described as charmingly authentic and sustainably forward-thinking. The most remarkable transformation, however, happened at the old factory site. Over the following weeks, the rusting facility that had been a source of anxiety for hundreds of families became a hub of activity. New equipment arrived daily, and the once dingy buildings received modern, energy-efficient upgrades. Workers who had feared unemployment found themselves enrolled in training programs that increased their skills and their pay. Through it all, May maintained her routine. Early, morning walks along the beach, still picking up trash. Work at the new innovation hub or the factory. Simple clothes and quiet evenings at home in her modest cottage. The only visible change was that her front yard garden had expanded with a small sign inviting neighbors to help themselves to fresh vegetables. One evening, as summer turned to fall, Diane Fletcher stopped by the garden with her Pomeranian. She hesitated before opening the gate, remembering how she had once gossiped about the eyesore to Eleanor. "Help yourself to whatever. Looks good," called May's voice from the porch where she sat working on a laptop. "The cherry tomatoes are especially sweet right now." Diane gathered a few tomatoes and some fragrant basil, feeling strangely nervous. "Thank you. They look wonderful." "You're welcome," May replied with a small smile. Diane lingered, gathering her courage. "I wanted to say I wasn't very welcoming when you first arrived. None of us were. I'm sorry about that." May looked up from her work, studying Diane's face. "Thank you for saying so." "I don't understand," Diane admitted. "You could live anywhere in any kind of luxury. Why choose this small cottage? Why drive that old car when you could have a fleet of luxury vehicles? Why shop at department stores when you could buy designer everything?" May set her laptop aside, giving Diane her full attention. "Do you know what happens when you suddenly change everything about your outward appearance?" Diane shook her head. "People treat you differently, but you're still the same person inside. I learned long ago that the way people respond to your exterior tells you everything about them and nothing about yourself." May's eyes were kind but serious. "I value authenticity. My car works perfectly well. This cottage has everything I need, and comfortable clothes let me focus on work that matters rather than maintaining an image. But if people knew who you really were from the beginning, they would have shown me a version of themselves based on what they wanted from me," May finished gently. "Instead, they showed me who they truly are. That's valuable information." Diane looked down at the vegetables in her hands, feeling the weight of May's words. "Are we all just terrible people then?" May laughed softly. "Not at all. People are complex. They can learn and grow. Look at how the community is coming together now around the innovation hub. Look at the teenagers from Whitecliff tutoring kids from East Side in math. Look at your husband volunteering his legal services to help factory workers with their immigration paperwork." Diane's eyes widened. "How did you know about that? He only started last week." "I make it my business to know what's happening in my community," May replied. "Real change happens quietly, one person at a time when no one's watching or applauding. Your husband's work matters more than any social event or charity donation." As Diane walked home with her garden treasures, she found herself viewing Whitecliff through new eyes. The neighborhood hadn't physically changed much, The houses were still enormous, the cars still expensive, the landscaping still perfect. But something fundamental had shifted in how people related to each other and to the surrounding communities. The irony wasn't lost on her that it had taken a billionaire pretending to be ordinary to show them how empty their pursuit of status had been all along, and the woman who could afford to buy the entire neighborhood continued to live simply in the smallest house, tending her garden and changing the world in ways that had nothing to do with appearances. That night at dinner, prepared with maize, tomatoes and basil, Diane told her husband, "I think I finally understand what real wealth looks like, and it has nothing to do with what's in our bank account." He nodded, looking more relaxed and satisfied than he had in years. Helping those, families with their paperwork, seeing what a difference it makes in their lives, I've never felt more useful as a lawyer. Outside their window, lights glowed warmly from homes throughout White Cliff, while in the distance, the Innovation Hub shone like a beacon. Its doors opened late for a community coding class where teenagers from all backgrounds worked side by side, building the future together. 1 year had passed since Mei Lin first drove her old Honda through the gates of White Cliff. The seasons had changed. Trees had bloomed and shed their leaves, and the community had transformed in ways far deeper than the physical changes to its buildings. On this bright spring morning, children played on the new playground behind the Innovation Hub, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Parents chatted on benches nearby, some in designer clothes, others in work uniforms, all engaged in easy conversation that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Inside the hub's main hall, chairs were being arranged for a town meeting. Posters showcased student projects and community initiatives. A wall of photographs documented the journey from groundbreaking to the present day, including images of East Side factory workers teaching coding skills to White Cliff retirees, and White Cliff teenagers helping younger kids with science projects. May arrived early, as was her habit. She still looked much the same. Simple clothes, practical haircut, no makeup. But there was a quiet satisfaction in her expression as she walked through the building, checking details and greeting the staff by name. People began filing in for the meeting, filling the seats without the usual social clustering that had once defined White Cliff gatherings. Eleanor arrived with her husband Harold, no longer positioning herself in the front row but taking seats in the middle among a mixed group of neighbors. Once the room was full, May stepped up to the podium. The crowd quieted immediately, a mark of the respect she had earned over the past year. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice soft yet carrying to every corner of the room. 1 year ago, I moved to White Cliff seeking quiet and ocean views. What I found was a community perfectly positioned to become a model for a new kind of social integration. She paused, looking around the room at faces that had once been strangers, some who had mocked her, others who had been invisible to the elite, all now part of something larger than themselves. "Today I'd like to share some numbers with you," May continued. The Innovation Hub has served over 4,000 visitors in its first 6 months. The scholarship program has funded education for 72 local students pursuing STEM fields. The factory now employs 320 people at living wages, with healthcare benefits and career advancement opportunities. Applause interrupted her, led by factory workers seated throughout the room. "But numbers only tell part of the story," May said when the clapping subsided. "What matters more are the connections formed between people who might never have met otherwise. The mentorships between retired engineers and young students, the friendships between families from different backgrounds, the collaborative projects solving local challenges." She gestured to the wall of photographs. "This is the real success, not the buildings or the programs, but the community you're all creating together." May then did something unexpected. She stepped away from the podium and took a seat in the audience, yielding the floor to community members who had signed up to speak about their experiences over the past year. First came Li Wei, the factory worker who had been among the first to be hired after the renovation. "A year ago I was preparing to leave this area," he said, his voice strong despite his initial nervousness. "The factory was closing. My daughter would have had to quit school to help support our family. Now, she's finishing her engineering degree while working part-time in the quality control lab. and I'm learning new skills I never thought I could master at my age. Next was a White Cliff teenager named Zach, whose family had lived in the exclusive community for generations. Before the Innovation Hub opened, I spent most of my time playing video games in my room, he admitted. Now I teach coding to kids from Eastside every Tuesday, and they've taught me things about determination and creativity that I never would have learned in my private school. One by one, people shared their stories. An elderly White Cliff resident who had found new purpose volunteering at the hub, a single mother from Eastside whose children now had access to technology they could never have afforded, a former corporate lawyer who had quit his high-stress job to provide legal aid to immigrant families. Eleanor Harrington was the last to speak. She walked to the podium with the careful poise she had cultivated over decades as a social leader, but her expression was different now, less practiced, more genuine. When Maylene first arrived in White Cliff, she began, I saw her as someone who didn't belong in our community. I judged her by her car, her clothes, her simple lifestyle. She paused, meeting May's eyes in the audience. I was wrong in ways that now embarrass me deeply. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Eleanor Harrington was not known for admitting mistakes. Over the past year, I've had to reconsider everything I thought I knew about value, worth, and community, she continued. Working with the scholarship committee has shown me how much talent exists beyond our neighborhood's gates. And while I'm still learning, still making mistakes, I'm grateful for the chance to be part of something that matters more than social standing. She announced that the annual White Cliff Charity Gala had been reimagined as a community innovation fair, where residents from all walks of life could present solutions to local challenges, with the Chen Foundation funding the most promising initiatives. This new format has already generated more real impact than 20 years of our previous approach, Eleanor admitted. And for that revelation alone, I owe May a debt of gratitude. When the meeting concluded, people lingered, breaking into conversation groups that crossed all the old boundaries of wealth, education, and background. Children raced back outside to the playground while teenagers gathered around the 3D printers to continue a project they'd been working on. May found herself standing with Harold, Eleanor, and a small group of Eastside residents, discussing plans for expanding the factory's training program to include green building technologies. There's growing demand for sustainable construction workers, said a former factory machinist who now led the training initiative. We could partner with local builders to create apprenticeship pathways. My construction firm would be interested in participating, offered a White Cliff contractor who had once complained about service staff being visible during daylight hours. We've been struggling to find skilled workers trained in the latest green methods. May listened more than she spoke, occasionally asking a question or suggesting a connection between ideas. This was how she preferred to work, not as the center of attention, but as a catalyst for collaboration. As the conversation wound down, a newcomer approached their group, a woman in a business suit who had been touring the Innovation Hub with the mayor. Ms. Lynn, the mayor called out, I'd like to introduce Gabriela Ortiz from the Federal Economic Development Agency. She's interested in using the White Cliff Eastside Partnership as a model for other communities. May greeted the visitor, warmly but without fanfare. The real experts are right here, she said, introducing the factory trainer and the others in the circle. They're the ones making this work every day. Later, as the mayor and the federal representative prepared to leave, May walked them to their car. I don't understand, Gabriela said quietly. From what I've read, you've invested over $200 million in this community. You've revolutionized the relationship between two historically divided neighborhoods. Yet you seem content to stand in the background and let others take credit. May smiled. The point was never for me to be recognized. The point was for the community to recognize itself, its potential, its interconnectedness, its capacity for change. Still, the mayor added, everyone knows this wouldn't have happened without you. Perhaps, May acknowledged, but it won't continue without them taking ownership. That's the real transformation, from dependency to agency, from charity to partnership. After the visitors departed, May walked back to her cottage along the beach path. The same path where she had once picked up trash alone now had community, cleanup stations, and was maintained by volunteer groups from both neighborhoods. Her phone rang, her business partner Jin, calling from Quantum Core headquarters on the other side of the country. "How's the secret billionaire in a small-town experiment going?" Jin asked, the smile evident in his voice. "It stopped being an experiment months ago," May replied, watching children from East Side and White Cliff building sandcastles together on the beach. "Now it's just community building." "And the next phase?" Jin prompted. "I'm looking at 3 potential locations," May said. "Similar dynamics, economic divisions, untapped potential, structural barriers that money alone can't solve. You could just donate to existing organizations," Jin pointed out. "It would be simpler than moving to another town and starting over." May stopped walking, looking out at the ocean. "This was never about writing checks, Jin. It's about demonstrating what's possible when resources are combined with respect and genuine partnership." That evening, a new family moved into the house next door to May's cottage, a young couple from East Side with 2 small children. The husband worked at the factory. The wife was a nurse. They had qualified for the new mixed-income homeownership program that May had quietly established. As they unloaded their modest belongings, Eleanor arrived with a group of neighbors carrying home-cooked meals, plants, and offers of help with unpacking. There was no condescension in their welcome, no performative charity, just the ordinary kindness of neighbors. From her porch, May watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. When a reporter had asked her last week why she hadn't simply revealed her wealth from the beginning, May had replied, "People show you who they truly are when they think you have nothing to offer them. That knowledge is far more valuable than any fortune." The reporter had seemed puzzled by this answer, unable to imagine why a billionaire would care about such things. But watching Eleanor, once the embodiment of superficial status, now genuinely helping the factory worker's child carry her toys inside, May knew her approach had been right. Wealth could build buildings, fund programs, and create opportunities. But the real work of changing hearts and minds required something money couldn't buy: authentic human connection across the boundaries people created to separate themselves from one another. As dusk fell over White Cliff, lights came on in homes. Throughout the community, the grand mansions on the bluff and the modest cottages near the beach, the new mixed-income development and the renovated apartments in East Side, different homes, different families, different stories, all now part of something larger than their individual circumstances. And in her simple cottage, surrounded by her vegetable garden that now served as a model for similar gardens throughout both neighborhoods, Maylene began planning her next community transformation, taking the lessons of White Cliff with her, while leaving its residents to continue the journey they had begun together.